He has a prominent Amish community, and today a viewer wanted to know more about the regulations for Amish buggies in the Commonwealth. Victor Puente has today's good question.
For today's good question, Dolores asks, why are the Amish not required to have a license plate on their buggies and pay road taxes like everyone else who drives on the road? Well, the simple answer is that buggies fall outside of the requirements for being taxed because of several state laws. Owners do have to pay sales tax when purchasing those buggies, but Kinsey Morrison with the Kentucky Finance and Administration Cabinet tells me buggies are not subject to usage tax or personal property taxes. At the beginning of this year, HB 360 went into effect that exempted farm machinery from property taxes. She told me Amish buggies are also exempt from title and registration because of KRS 186A.080. It says in part, no Kentucky certificate of registration, license plate, or certificate of title need to be applied for or obtained for. Then it lists several different categories. One of them includes a vehicle moved solely by animal power, which buggies would fall under. There have been some counties in other states, including Indiana, which have passed buggy taxes, but there are none that we could find in Kentucky. If you have a good question, you can email goodquestion@wkyt.com. I'll see you on WKYT Mornings.